Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Exciting video. We're going to learn about Ross and his leadership, really his background, his, track record and what goes into building successful businesses. First things first, Ross, how are you?
I'm great, Jason. How are you?
Absolutely fantastic. So here, I know we're going to go quick. There's a lot to cover in this video. Extremely successful background. I want to just throw it to you. I know we've done videos in the past, but do you want to start off, your background, some of your early track record, how you've built some of these past businesses, and then we'll lead it into, of course, Starco.
Sure. So I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I started my first company in college. I got involved in the oil and gas industry and started formulating and then manufacturing corrosion inhibitors for gas transmission lines and some other applications in preserving equipment. And we were doing it in a way that was at the time pretty leading edge and very green compared to the solutions that they were utilizing back then. And, it was always very apparent to me that, you could commercialize or create wherever your goals were pointed towards. And it could be the greatest thing since sliced bread. But if you didn't really have a firm focus on how you were going to go after a market, then, it becomes very gray and you're just involved in an exercise with, frankly, too much risk. And so the reason why that opportunity made so much sense is that in Calgary, all the big oil companies, all their head offices were downtown. So if you were aggressive and you wanted to knock on doors and build connections and really go after it, you could. So that opportunity really existed. And so as we built out some really unique products early on, we started to, through the University of Calgary, get in touch with some of the big oil companies, Shell and some others, and we started to work with them. And we started to show them what this technology could do. And then you'd really start to engage with them to see where it could fit within the organization. And we started to build out programs and get spec'd into projects, and the business really started to take off. So I grew that business in the late 90s to sort of early 2000s. And I had hooked up with an engineering firm that had really taken a liking to the business. And by that time, I had been exposed to a variety of different markets, things like industrial coatings, construction chemicals, and a little bit of consumer products. And, I had somewhat of a strong capability to take a look at very sort of technical problems and be able to formulate chemical solutions pretty seamlessly and pretty quickly. So I became very involved in the raw material markets because, as I say, as a baker, you're only as good as your ingredients. And so I sort of became obsessed with that market. And I was able to sort of curate technology to solve a lot of different problems. And I started to do that in industrial coatings and in construction chemicals. And so as my entrepreneurial spirit started to pivot a little bit away from oil and gas maintenance products, I saw bigger opportunities elsewhere. And I ended up selling that first company to an engineering firm kind of early in the game. And that was a pretty exciting event. And I started getting involved in construction chemicals. I had a partner at the time, and we had learned of a very large project that was happening in California. And this is kind of what brought me down to LA. And there was an enormous project that they were building here called the Alameda Corridor, which was several, 20, 30, 40 miles of concrete corridor that was going to be exposed. And they had us come in and develop really an anti-stick, anti-graffiti coating. And we had to go through a bunch of different hoops and a bunch of different trials. And we had to work with, departments of transportation and run through efficacy and run through toxicology and all these sorts of things. And we ended up developing a really interesting solution and closed basically a landmark deal. Even to this day, I believe it's the largest structure on the planet to be coated with an anti-graffiti coating. And, it was sort of small seven figures at the time, but enormous for us. And we started to really develop more construction chemicals. And after that, I wanted to not only develop more products and get deeper into things that were getting closer to consumer products, because we were sort of touching on the industrial side and then selling through distribution, which can start to touch consumer products. What I really wanted to do was start to own our own manufacturing platform, and kind of became obsessed with the idea of making maybe my first acquisition. And so I made my first acquisition in 2005. And then really from then to now, we've made, I don't know, mid-20s of acquisitions.
Question for you.
Yeah,
What
go ahead.
what goes into a successful acquisition? You made 20 of them now. I'm curious, what do you look for? What do you see? Obviously, how do you spot opportunity? And are you looking at, hey, this is a company that's at, this place, but I know with me and with my team, my expertise, it could go to here? Or is this hey, this company is ahead of the curve for a trend that I see coming. Let me buy them.
The answer is yes. Look, there's many different reasons to make an acquisition. And so let me just bucket a few of them. Look, you can find a company that is in a similar vein as yourself, whatever that venture may be, and they may be doing some great things and so on and so forth. And you may look at that company, you may say, oh, there's a tremendous amount of synergy between the two companies. There's cost synergies. We can streamline administration or purchasing or finance or sales, account management, operations. You may be able to close down a plant and make it more efficient. So there may be a lot of cost synergies that make sense to pull off an acquisition. And there may be a lot of revenue synergies. Maybe, this entity has access to an entire retail distribution base that you didn't have. For example, we along the way bought one of the top brands in the automotive sealant market. And it was a tremendous brand. It was a scaling business, but they needed more help from a finance standpoint. They needed more administrative help. They needed more organizational, more sort of institutional support. They also needed to have capability to expand them out of their core distribution, which was automotive retail. So it was healthy for us to come in and support the expansion of the business. And on the flip side, we didn't have branded retail business in the automotive retail sector. So with one acquisition, we sort of bought that entire distribution. So there was synergy both ways. But ultimately, the overarching thesis for an acquisition is that, look, it's really difficult to grow a business organically, right? It's really difficult to make the next greatest mousetrap and have it hockey stick curve and hit a home run. And so, we're extremely diversified, right? We're in household, we're in air care and disinfectants and personal care and arts and crafts and automotive and food and spirits and in beverage. So you've got a lot of different irons in the fire where each individual entity has its own brain trust, curating new intellectual property to try to grow organically all the time, every day. That's the war, that's the game, you're at it all the time. And there has to be a certain amount of entrepreneurial culture to really foster that through, so those R&D departments can really be active. And then the outside sales that has the connectivity to the public, to the shelf, to digital distribution, to kind of say, hey, well, there's opportunities or there's holes or there's white space to go after. So you need that kind of connectivity to really make that happen. That's a very difficult thing to do, very challenging. And it's one of the reasons why you have some of these bloated CPG companies like the SCJs of the world and Unilevers of the world and Clarkson, which are amazing companies, but it's very difficult for even them to put out the next Windex that just changes the dynamic and has ubiquitous distribution through everywhere. And so what happens? It's technically or theoretically, it's much easier to grow via acquisition. Because when you make that acquisition, it's one very large step forward. It's one big bite. You make $100 million acquisition, boom, you just grew by 100 million in rev. It's a very difficult thing to do organically. And you could do it and do it and do it and do it. And so you can scale businesses. Now, let's not pretend that's easy to do, right? You have to find the target. You have to diligence the target. You have to create the right economics and the right environment to get something done so that a management team or an ownership team or a private equity team feels like it's in their best interest to divest. There's financial engineering that has to take place. There's a tremendous amount of negotiation that takes place. There's a tremendous amount of diligence that has to take place from legal, from insurance, from human resources, from any existing liabilities, to looking at their intellectual property portfolios, to looking at customer concentrations, to making sure the books aren't being cooked, right? There's a tremendous amount of due diligence that has to take place. And then ultimately, once you buy it and once you get something done, that's just day one. Now it's the integration, and there's cultural issues, and there's cost synergies, and there's timelines in place, and there's regulatory, and you have to make these organisms that are standing like this go like this. And there's a lot of art in that behind the science.
Yeah. No, interesting. Well, thanks for that insight. Curious for people watching this, I'll probably ask, like, is there a ballpark figure on the like dollar figure of acquisitions you've done in, the past, in your life? Like, is there anything, any taste for people you can give?
I mean, from an enterprise value, listen, we've acquired, well over $100 million in enterprise value. Okay, so we can talk in, valuation, but we acquired all these businesses based on cash flow of the business, based on leveraging our asset value, our EBITDA value, leveraging the incoming asset and their EBITDA and fixed asset value and overall equity value of the business. And to make $100 million worth of acquisitions doesn't mean that you need $100 million, right? You need to understand the financial controls and the financial engineering of how those acquisitions are leveraged. There's a very traditional saying out there, which is, was a product of the 1980s called the LBO, the leverage buyout. And so what's the technical definition of a leverage buyout? Leveraging assets to borrow capital to acquire the asset. And so, it's not just you coming to the table saying, okay, well, here's a business. It's got, this amount of assets. Maybe it's got X amount of dollars in accounts receivables, or maybe it's got X amount of dollars in fixed assets, or maybe it's got X amount in inventory, or maybe it's got a certain amount of earnings power that some lenders will look at that are not asset-based lenders, that are cash flow lenders. And they're going to say, okay, well, that's a certain amount of cash flow that we think we're going to due diligence it, and we're going to make sure it's stable. And based on that, we're going to lend you X amount of dollars. So what you're doing is you're taking an asset, you're bringing it to the debt capital markets, and you're saying, okay, bankers, how much would you lend on this? So you have to know their process of due diligence to understand how much capital that you may be able to have to go buy this business.
It's an art, and I think you could write a book on probably acquisitions by this time with how many you've done. I've got a
Listen, we've
question.
never used our own capital, ever. We've never used our own capital because there's better places to put the capital. We'd rather utilize leveraged capital as long as the debt ratios are small and thin, because you want to be risk off. And so that's on one aspect. And then on the other side of the ledger is, well, how good of an acquirer are you? If you buy a shitty business, even if the leverage ratio is great and the business doesn't perform, you're screwed anyways. So you have to have significant subject matter expertise in acquiring the asset, due diligence of the asset, and making sure what you're buying is secure. And then on the other side of the ledger, really understanding how much leverage can the business really support. And then the art is, as an operator and as an owner, how much leverage are you actually comfortable with? Listen, I can run around and borrow 6 times EBITDA if I wanted to, but that's not the cloth that I'm cut from. I have to put my head on the pillow and sleep at night too, right? So am I comfortable borrowing 1 times or 2 times or something of that nature? Of course, that's great. And so you're leveraging that capital, you're preserving your own capital, you're growing your own capital, you're growing the company's balance sheet, and you've got a tremendous amount of strength there and a very manageable piece of leverage. And if you can continue to do that and maintain the same ratios, the debt capital markets and the banks are salivating for that, because it allows them to deploy the capital to risk off initiatives. And the amount of capital that you can garner is endless.
No, hey, definitely know your stuff about acquisitions, and you've proven that incredible. And I look forward to any questions people would have. I've got a question. I know we're trying to go through these. What goes into scaling an innovative, an emphasis on innovative, consumer product? Really, obviously, you guys have some hit products. I'd love for you to mention them again. I'll let you take the thunder, but I'd love to hear from, mindset standpoint, from a strategy standpoint, what goes into creating a successful consumer product, a behavior changing product?
The question is bifurcated in the sense of, the first part of the question is, what does it take to create a successful product? And then you said, well, what's it take to create a behavior changing product? And that there's a nuance there. So which one do you want me to tackle first? Let's just say a successful product, right? To make a successful product, there's some really basic things that should resonate with really anybody. If you have a product that you're going out to market with, and you would like to have a buyer meaning you want to sell it to, say, a retailer. That's a buyer. And maybe they want to buy it because they know that if you fill this void for them, they can transact and sell it. So there's one dynamic. If you want to have a successful product where you want to go direct to the consumer and you are analyzing the competitive landscape and you want to plan that competitive landscape, so what's it going to take to be successful? So let's find the analytics. Let's see what's moving. Let's see what's most popular. Let's see where the quality reviews are, right? It all starts with the data. You're going to analyze the data as much as you can to identify what is best in class. Once you can identify what's best in class, you're now going to put yourself to a test. Can you do it better? Can you do it less expensive? Can you do it in more volume, more value? Can you do it with more impressive aesthetics, something else where there's a proverbial hook? Can you do better than what is achieving best in class? So that's the first question. If you get to a point where you're like, yes, I can do, but you know what? I can't do it at that price point. So then you have to ask yourself, what are the analytics in the top 5 in the category? Because even if top 1 is doing $1 million a month, top 5 may be doing $150,000 a month. And if you can supplement the 5th in the row of what's best, maybe that's ample for you. Maybe that's enough for you to jump into the game. But it starts with analytics. You need to let the data play. Once you have all the data, you're put in a position to now make rational decisions. Without that, put a blindfold on, throw a dart. Okay, so that's successful product. What's it take to make something behavior change? Listen, the mission statement of Starco Brands is to only commercialize products that are behavior changing. In other words, if we see a lucrative opportunity for a Me Too, it doesn't make the cut. That's a tall order. And the stakes are high. So for us, in curating a solution, you need to have a certain amount of boxes checked before you go and start saying, we can invent, we can create the next best thing. Because the product invention is probably only about a third of the equation. The next third is going to be strategic planning and finance. And the next third is going to be, for lack of a better word, I'll use a big all-encompassing word, marketing. Right? So it starts with understanding the boxes. So if I'm going to make something behavior changing, before I look at the intellectual property, how am I going to finance the education? How am I going to finance the marketing? How am I going to curate compelling, easy to understand, eye-catching marketing? How am I going to do that? That's going to take someone's talent, whether it's yours or someone you got to hire or a firm you got to hire. It's going to take someone's talent. And by the way, it's also data-driven. So there's that whole piece, and we're going to come back to it. Another big part of that is, how am I going to make my widget? And I'm not just talking about one of them. So let's understand the supply chain. Am I going to be able to pilot run this? Am I going to be able to have inventory at all times? Am I going to be able to scale this? What are my economics at each of those levels? Am I making money right out of the gates with low volume? Or do I expect to lose money for a long period of time until I have the volume and then I can start to make the money? And how am I going to survive that journey? Since we're going in reverse, and then what's the widget? What innovation is going to cause you to change one's behavior that the general public so used to for so many reasons? So that becomes super challenging to find the white space, and the entrepreneurial spirit has to be alive and well within, anybody that's going after that. But typically, the way it typically starts, if it's not, a proverbial light bulb moment for someone, typically the way it starts is, again, we go back to data. And if you analyze the competitive landscape, whether it's on shelves or online, and you look at things that are successful in genres or channels that you like or that attract you, can you solve problems better than the competitive landscape? What problems are being solved by the products that are being procured, and can you do it better? That's the intellectual property. This is where there's magic. And if you get to a point where you really believe you can, don't be romanced by your own belief. This is where research groups come in, focus groups come in, as many different people's opinions as possible. You want to let the data play. You may be biased to your technology. You think, oh yeah, it's better because you just do this and this and this. Well, does everyone use it the same way you do? Or are you biased? And even the most unbiased people that are behind the products are still biased. And you must force unbiased opinion. And you can never do enough focus groups and research groups. And we do it for every single product. We have this very big innovation coming out in the spirits category. We did 3 years of it. And then we put it in a control brand out into the market just to see the market's reaction. And then on the labels and the graphic design, it had 3 years of renditions and several focus groups and research groups. And where we started from a formulary standpoint and where we started from an aesthetic standpoint is drastically different to where we ended. And thank God we've done the data, the research. So let's assume that you have the behavior change. And now you're going to go into, really taking a look at the supply chain, data driven. Sometimes if people don't have expertise in that and they want to reach out to companies, there's companies out there that have expertise in curating and managing manufacturing companies' supply chains, companies that just do that holistically, consulting basis. Sometimes that's great. There's a tremendous amount of data there. And if you don't know that game really, really well, you can get hurt really badly, either because you have vendors that are supplying components into the product and maybe all your eggs in one basket, and all of a sudden they're from Asia and there's a problem in Asia and you can't get your components and you are down. So having A suppliers, B suppliers, C suppliers, having them domestic, having them overseas, supply chain is key if you really believe you're going to scale. Okay, lastly, education. How are you going to finance the education, especially if you're starting something on a shoestring? The way that we typically do it is, yes, pay to play. But if you take a look at Starco Brands and our model with Starco Brands, our model was really birthed out of our M&A model. And our M&A model, the thesis behind why I like to make acquisitions, and we talked about it because we can grow easier and so on and so forth, and you want to find synergies, and it can be 1 + 1 = 10, and all that's great. But the biggest thing for me, and I literally have this conversation daily with people, but the biggest thing for me in an acquisition is, listen, we just acquired a company that's essentially 100 years old, okay? The amount of brain trust that a 100-year-old company has, it's priceless. You can't build that. You could never get it. You can't build it. It is what it is. That organism is so alive, so visceral, so impactful that when that becomes part of the acquisition, you've got this cumulative amalgamation of the brain trust. And that to me is everything. Listen, you could give us a problem one-on-one, and you and I could retire to an office and go and figure it out, and we may come up with great solutions. But we both know that if we're in the same office, heads together, we will do better. And that goes on exponentially when you make acquisitions and have a good way to integrate culture, to really have that communal brain trust come to the table. It's the same thing when we think of marketing behavior changing products. How do we market? We don't want to up the company's risk profile of saying, well, you know what, we're going to hire a bunch of creators and make a bunch of commercials and have all this stuff going and buy a bunch of media and throw it out there and just cross our fingers. The risk profile is too high for a new project. Maybe you do a little bit of that to sort of create a marketing awareness campaign, sure. But you want to be able to do it in a frugal manner to the extent that you want to make the organization still healthy and not risk the entire organization. So what do? We create partnerships, right? We did a very large partnership with Hearst Media, and they came in and they partner for advertising real estate, where they have certain participations in the product. We did a very large deal with them, our marketing agency of record, where they came in and helped us with all the aesthetics and so on and so forth, participation in the products and so on and so forth. And that amalgamation of brain trust, that water raises all boats, and everybody participates in the wealth creation. So there's innovative ways to be able to get around the corner of how to finance something in a big way. There's very smart ways to tackle your supply chain to make sure that you're protected for the business as a fiduciary for that product. And when it comes to intellectual property and understanding the landscape, you've got to be able to go where they ain't. You've got to be able to look at all of the solutions in the market and see what you can do better. And that's a difficult exercise, but it can be data driven.
Yeah. Ross, I got a question for you, and amazing answers. And of course, we're going to go into a lot of other things as well, like your marketing partnerships, like some of the products and other things. And I kind of wanted to cap this video off with one question for you. And it's not an easy one, but can you define what behavior change is? And, for someone that, is just hearing, about behavior change, I mean, they might think it's, oh, this is going to make me go for runs, or this, or it's that. Can you talk about maybe, what in your eyes, the definition of a behavior change is, and what a fit would be to Starco Brands?
We think we've got a really interesting saying that I think encapsulates what behavior change really is. And it's a cute word, and we say the word smart cut. It's a smart cut. It's not a shortcut. It's a smart cut. So it allows you to fulfill your need to carry out a certain operation, but it does it either quicker, faster, more economical, more environmental, or safer. So we're allowing you to carry out an operation that you typically do, only we're removing any of the limitations of the sacrifices that you're so accustomed to. And therein lies the smart cut. For example, we launched the household cleaning line, Breathe, right? Breathe is a household cleaning aerosol line with all the normal products. You have a bathroom cleaner and stainless steel cleaner and a furniture polish and a multi-purpose cleaner and some other products. And so you can go ahead and you can spray this aerosol and go ahead and clean. However, the juice inside the products is holistically biodegradable. And the propellant in the can is just compressed air. And so that had never been done before. And so why do people use aerosols in the first place? They use them because, if you're cleaning your car with a pressure washer or a hose, what's more efficacious, right? So aerosols, are pressurized. They can even have depth of penetration in cleaning substrates. You can do it quicker. You have higher coverage rates. They're very efficient. And in some applications, you couldn't do it with a trigger spray, because if you had very large surfaces trigger spray, you get something called finger fatigue, which everyone sort of felt before, and they kind of laid down on the surface, and you're gonna have to wipe for some small jobs or whatever. It's fine, but if you got to clean, let's say, a glass door or something like this, or a big table, and you hit it with an aerosol in 2 seconds and wipe it, it's much more fast and it's much more efficient. But traditionally, the consumer would have to deal with fumes. They'd have to deal with the hydrocarbon propellant, which is essentially butane or propane that you're spraying in indoors, which can hurt the air quality. They're also flammable. So they've got a lot of drawbacks to allow you to have the efficiency. And so what did we do with this new line is we removed all those limitations so that you could have your cake and eat it too. So we thought of it as a smart cut. And then one step further, we also had it became the first aerosol line in history, globally, to garner the EPA Safer Choice approval that had never been done before, and was a huge feather in the company's cap, in the product line's cap, that also helped in that other box of education and marketing. One step further, it also, because of our relationship with Hearst, got the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval that started in 1909 as one of the most respected consumer goods seals on the planet. Education and marketing. And the other part of the Smart Cup is, and this goes back into the data, is who's the market today and how are we communicating with them? And so the data behind that is to say, well, the competitive landscape is the proverbial scrubbing bubbles of the world and the Windexes and so on and so forth. And when we look at some of those brands, albeit tremendous legacy, phenomenal brands that I tip my hat to, those large CPG companies, because they're really, fascinating business and case studies of what they built. The marketing of those products and the aesthetics of those products really haven't changed in the last 50 or 60 years. And that resonates with a certain demographic. And so to really understand where the market is today and how younger generations are growing up, and whether it's mom or whether it's dad and younger generations and young families, they really want something that, yes, checks all those boxes for family safety, which is consumer safety, environmental safety. They want it to work as well, so they better be efficacious. But also, they want the design and the aesthetics to also resonate. So when you take a look at Breathe, the labels and so on and so forth, they're beautiful. There's a very high artistic value that resonates from stylistically, which is very within the age group and pointing to the demographic. And so again, when you take a look at the product all the way from cradle to grave, why is it behavior changing? It's behavior changing because it looks and feels different. It, from a formulary and internal standpoint, is different and better for you and better for the environment and so on and so forth. It's providing the same efficacy as the older solutions did. And ultimately, you're encapsulating the solution that falls under the auspices of being a smart cut. And so the behavior is being changed. The behavior says that I'm really not, let's say, comfortable with using traditional aerosols in my home for all these sorts of reasons. And therefore, I'm going to use a solution that is maybe less efficacious in trigger sprays or whatever. But now it's saying you can come back to something that is more efficacious, that will allow you to do the job better and faster, but you won't have to sacrifice all these other things. And it's countertop worthy. So you're checking all those boxes. And so when you put that on shelf and you're in that competitive landscape and that competitive mix of some of the older solutions, not only do you stand out, but you immediately become the first choice because you're changing the behavior, which is allowing the consumer to get back in the game. And you mix that with a communication plan and a marketing plan and a media plan that reinforces that vision and reinforces the education on what you've done and why it's better and why it's safer. Now it's just about sticking to the vision, and over time, if that resonates, you win.
Oh, hey, an amazing definition. Thanks for the insight. Of course, we're going to do a deeper dive into products, into revenue, marketing, and other things as we go. But Ross, thanks so much for joining. This was an awesome segment.
Thanks so much.